This is the last of our sessions here in the auditorium. I hope the whole day has gone well for you. There was so much content, I know, and you had to make choices. But as you've heard before, there's lots of video content. We'll make sure we make that available for you. For this session, we wanted to talk about a concept that came up early on in the day, this idea of paths that need to get bent and the sorts of leaders that are going to be able to bend them. And, of course, the commercial opportunities that surround bending those paths, which is an unmitigated good thing if we need to get them bent, and we do need to get them bent. So we're going to talk a bit. Now, everybody's got a little bit different view on what skill set is involved in a path-bending leader. I mentioned to you that we've changed our curriculum around. We didn't want to just create an aspirational leadership profile or archetype. We also changed our whole curriculum around to try and deliver more on that, and I can talk a little bit about that in the context of this panel. One of the things that we did, just as an example, what's one of the skills that we drilled into our curriculum? Some of you saw Sarah Beckman's session. How many people saw Sarah? Okay, so quite a few people saw Sarah. Sarah put together for us, we prototyped it about 3 years ago and then put it in the core curriculum last year for the first year. It's a core course in problem framing. That's really what it is. It's about problem framing. And an awful lot of senior people that I and others were talking to, they were saying, Rich, we will always need problem solvers. We'll always need them, and business schools are pretty good at producing them. So that's a good thing. But what we're scarce, what we don't have enough of, are people who can think in a more disciplined way further upstream at the problem finding and problem framing stages. All right? Great problem framers, boy, you know it when you're around them. You just know it. They can capture the essence of a problem, and they understand deeply the distinction between symptoms and causes, and it's just wonderful to be around it. They are really valuable thinkers. Now, are these things that are just God-given, or are these things that we can develop? We believe at the core of our philosophy that you can develop these things. You can also select for them in admissions, etc. But that's a new core course. It's unique. Sarah Beckman's core course is unique. There's no other business school that has anything like it. So that's one of the things that we've drilled into our curriculum, and we think great problem framing skills is important for thinking about path bending in a more concrete way, because we have to get concrete. We have to get real. We need to deliver. We need to have outcomes here, right? We can't just wave our hands. So that's largely what we're going to be talking about here today. You know, this school has produced so many path bending leaders. Let me just give you a few examples. Margot Alexander. Margot Alexander is an alum of our school. You may not know her. She worked in the finance industry for a long, long time, has been retired for, I think, at least 10 years now. She's going to be giving our undergraduate commencement address, by the way, in just a couple of weeks. Margot broke tremendous ground for women on Wall Street. She was really quite remarkable. First woman to run a major trading desk on Wall Street. She really played a very, very big role there. Currently, she's chair of Acumen Fund, so she's using all of her skills to do other wonderful things. But there's a person in the finance industry that was clearly bending pathways and doing it in ways that very few people were doing at the time. A second path bending, there's a long list of people we could toss out here. Patrick Awuah. I don't know how many people know Patrick. A few of you might have had Patrick in your class. A couple of you have met him. Patrick is one of these people where you think, oh my gosh, I am just not getting anything done in life. He is, so Patrick, I had the pleasure of having him in my class. For those of you that have taken my class, I was mostly teaching international finance and international business here. Patrick was here in the late 1990s, 96, 97, something like that. And he knew when he got here, he came from Microsoft, grew up in Ghana. He knew when he got here that he wanted to start a university in Ghana. And he filtered all the content that he saw in the 2 years that he was here with that objective in mind. He was so persuasive, so compelling and inspiring that some of his classmates went with him in Ghana, to Ghana at graduation time. Started a university. It's called Ashesi University. It's extraordinarily successful. They have graduated 5 or 6 or 7 classes now. Anyways, I heard from a faculty member at Stanford this year who was talking to somebody who knows Africa very well, and this person was saying to him that Ashesi was one of the best universities in all of Western Africa, and its reputation is growing. So this is a path bender, if ever there was one. Here's another one, very quickly, Paul Rice. You know, Paul Rice really got the fair trade movement started. He is the president and CEO of Fair Trade USA. But this is somebody that looked out at the world and thought there are working conditions and other elements of the way trade happens that aren't working well enough, that the producers aren't close enough to the sale and basically aren't getting full value from what they're producing, and many other elements. Bending paths there as well. So, look, there are many, many different ways we can think about path bending. This panel is absolutely terrific. You have bios. I'll just give you their names, and then we'll go right into it. But we want to dig into this concept, and we want to try and get it to be as concrete as possible. It needs to apply to lots and lots of different industries. It needs to apply to lots and lots of different levels of leadership within those industries. It needs to apply across geographies and cultures, right? We want this to be a capacious concept, but also something that is real. Something that we think if we put more of that kind of human capital into the system, that we'd all be better off. This is the challenge. Julie Clugage, MBA, O2, Global Operations Communications Manager at Intel. Victor Dallant, MBA, 87, Founder, CEO at Dallant Networks, LLC. Marcelo Vasquez, MBA O2, Advisor at Mediastream Limited in Chile. Brett Wilson, MBA 07, Co-Founder, CEO of TubeMogul. Peter Wilson, MBA 92, Managing Director, Head, North American Alternative Investor Strategies Group at BlackRock. And we had one other that we were having on the panel, but he was pulled away to Cairo, Egypt, because he's being recognized and awarded there by the World Summit. And so that was a wonderful thing. Raj Shah couldn't be here today, but he was the founder of what's called the Pure Water Exchange in India. He was interested in how clean water gets to people in places like India. And he is being recognized the world over for having bent some paths and broken new ground in that area. Let me turn it over to the panel. Maybe the best way to do this might just a minute or two, three on the way you think about this notion of path bending, whether you think it's useful or not useful. This is the marketplace for ideas if people think it's less useful. But we'd love to hear from you. Why don't we go this way? Yours, Brett. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be here. TubeMogul is a company that was born of Haas. We founded the company in 2007, won the business plan competition. There's a little bit of a deja vu. My co-founders John and Mark are here, and we're really proud to be here. When I think about path bending leadership, it's about creating cultures that not only can handle complexity. And all the change that's happening in this world, but thrive in it, that love it, that view it as their source of differentiation. And it seems to me that it wasn't that long ago that a group of smart people could put together a strategy or a plan and present it to the board and then go execute it and then do it again a year later or a quarter later. And there was this notion that beliefs about the world, frameworks about the world would persist. And now it feels like the world just changes every day. And open source technology and globalization and freer flows of capital, they just make innovation faster. And it feels like the companies that spend a lot of time and money thinking about their long-term strategies, they just get their lunch eaten now by more nimble competitors. And so your role as a path-bending leader is to create a culture that's agile, that's constantly looking, trying to figure out how to make things better, even if it means cannibalizing your own business, because if you don't do it, someone else will.
Thank you, Brett. Victor.
Well, building on this, I think for me the definition of path-bending leadership would be paranoia. I am totally paranoid. I'm thinking about Andy Grove, the co-founder of Intel, who wrote the book, Only the Paranoid Will Survive. That's me. I'm totally paranoid. Whenever I get up in the morning and reach the office, my own business, I tell my team, we're going to go bankrupt in 3 months. I know it. I can feel it. Here he goes again. Okay. This is, things are moving so fast that the way I look at business is that you're driving on the highway, Of course, you can see ahead, you can see the back because you have the rear view mirror, but you cannot really see on the side because you don't have a side view mirror. And who is driving along with you on the side? Somebody who has got a nicer car, a Beamer, convertible, red. There's a driver, handsome, with beautiful sunglasses and, of course, lots of hair. And you cannot see him, of course, you cannot see him. And at some point, he's going to move faster than you. And this is always what I wonder when we run those meetings. What is it that we're not seeing? Something big that's most likely to the right or to the left because we're just looking front or back and we're missing this opportunity. So for me, path-bending leadership is about anticipating what you cannot see, which is basically called paranoia.
Thank you, Victor. Julie, please.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me here today. It's great to see everybody. You know, when you asked me to do this, I thought path bending. It's like, okay, well, you're not an obvious leader and you've taken some sort of non-linear path. So for me, it's really been about knowing your key objective and then, you know, figuring out the most creative way to get there. And through my career, the times that I've tried to be most linear have been the biggest failures, actually. And the times that I've sort of learned to be flexible, persistent, try and be more creative, and just really demonstrate early results to people, those have been the times that we've actually been able to make the greatest impact. So I think maybe you asked me to be here because I'm in a group at Intel, actually, thank you for the Intel reference, that's a startup relative to Intel terms. And we've learned a lot about, you know, how to sort of fly under the radar with some key stakeholders at the beginning, because it might surprise you to know that at Intel, less than 5% of startups last more than 10 years. So when you get in those big companies, I think it's really hard to sort of break out of the mold. And so basically, you get enough early results so that when they find out about you, they can't kill you. And that's sort of been the definition of path-bending leadership for me.
Thanks, Julie. Brett, please, thanks.
So, you know, I guess I'm in an industry, finance industry, that's, you know, in some ways compared to you guys, a little more, I don't know, more traditional and going through a bit of a tough time, at least, you know, certain segments of the industry. I feel lucky to be at a company that operates as being a fiduciary only, where we've had, you know, a lot of black marks against investment banking and finance, that many of which are deserved, I think. So for me, some of the, you know, the path bending stuff is more, I guess, you know, setting a goal in terms of trying to do things that are good for the client and good for the customer, which would be more on the business side, creating lasting value. And then also, you know, we can talk more about it, but for me, the thing I didn't expect getting into the industry is if you ask me what's the perfect size organization for me, I would probably say something like 150 people, but the company I work for is 13 or 14,000 people. And then within that, the path bending is how are you going to make it work for you, which is critical. You have to make choices in a large organization of what way do you want to go, how ambitious do you want to be, do you want to be an individual contributor, do you want to be a manager of people, and those are very different paths. And there's other ones to take, but it determines how you need to act in that organization.
Thanks for that. Marcelo.
Hi, good to be here. Good to see everybody. I find the definition of path bending a little bit intimidating. As Rich was explaining in the morning, there are certain challenges that we have as a society, and those challenges need those paths to be bent. And when you imply that there's a path-bending leader, is someone that is capable of bending that path. And I think that's a lot of responsibility. But when thinking about examples of people that I know from Berkeley, I start to understand that, yes, it's possible. And it's actually a big responsibility, but it's not something that can't be done. I'm going to check the opportunity, probably following the conversations. I'm trying to share with you some examples of people in Chile that are bending paths from Berkeley. But thinking it alone as that you're going to be responsible of bending a path, I think it feels pretty heavy. I would say that to me this definition that you are proposing breaks the concept of leadership that we have in our minds. Usually when you think of a leader, you think of somebody that is very high, alone, leading, pulling with his own strength. And what I've seen from the examples you show, the people that I see from Berkeley, are people that are able to orchestrate, are people to use the networks, are people that connect, and they are able to very intelligently leverage the connections, the energy, and the willingness of the people that they have around to look for that goal. And that, I think, is what that means to me, what is a good path-bending leader.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I think, a number of themes have already arisen, right? We have sort of the smaller enterprise, larger enterprise, right? We've got a lot of work that we need to do. Most of the GDP of the modern economies, the major economies, is produced by larger organizations. That's just the reality of it, right? So where we are here with all the innovation and entrepreneurship in this San Francisco Bay Area ecosystem, we often think about disruptive innovation and we think about startups, and that is well and good. And of course, the venture capital lens on the world, the VC lens, is that's where it comes from. But Intel and BlackRock and organizations like that are going to need to get a lot of this work done, right? If you look, for example, at GE, GE is not talking about eco-imagination or healthy imagination just because it wants to do good, right? It's doing those things because it wants to do well, and those are some very large organizations that are lining these things up. So this idea, let's continue with the theme, perhaps Julie and Brett, the sort of larger organization context. And so when we think about some of the bigger issues that need to get confronted, Sarah Beckman, sometimes people call these things wicked problems, by which we mean, they require people to come at them from multiple angles, multiple domains of expertise brought to bear, and that complexity is the reason why you or anybody else sitting at their computer at night or at their desk during the day, they're not going to solve it. It's not pulling together enough of what needs to be pulled together. So could you talk a little bit more, Julie, about how you think about within Intel when something kind of, just the other side of the frontier is being perceived, how Intel tries to mobilize itself?
Yeah. So, and I probably won't be towing totally the Intel party line on this, but at Intel, typically when there's a really complex problem, they convene what's called a CSD. It's a corporate strategic discussion, and I hate those things. It's like, it ends up being a task force, and 6 months you just fight over the slides with all the different stakeholders across the organization, and we call it a rat hole. It ends up being such a rat hole. And so what I have found to be successful, and I think may be in line with your definition of path-bending leader, is you need to iterate. And the way I've seen things be successful at Intel when they're actually trying to change the status quo is just start off with a little pilot. Hey, no big deal. It's not threatening to you guys. We're just going to do this little pilot over here, and finding some stakeholders across the company who might not be the obvious ones, but who might be interested in it. So like, hey, yeah, why don't you guys come along and we'll just try this thing. And then you bring back some results and like, okay, nobody died over this, and now maybe we can make it a little bit bigger. And then the only way your CSD is going to succeed is when it's like after the fact, basically. You've already shown that it's successful, and you can take it in there. And yeah, we've been leading this sector for the past 6 years, but now we'll have the CSD, and you'll actually say that we're the leaders of it. But that's great. So for me, it's all about iterating, and I think the times where you try and just like think it all through from square one in PowerPoint are like the worst approach for me.
Well, that's a great example. If I can just connect to that before Brett, you talk to this. One of the things, so as we think about the kinds of skills that need to go into a curriculum to help society develop more path-bending leaders, I mean, that is a big challenge, but we've had to address it. One of the things that's on that list is problem framing. I've talked about that. But the second thing on the list is, in fact, experimentation. Experiment. Iterate, right? The idea that we sort of set strategy and then we put it on the rails and we let it ride. Boy, that's not the right. It is iterate. It is right. Think big, but experiment small. Fail fast. You've heard, but that's not just kind of a Silicon Valley phrase anymore, right? even the largest organizations are basically saying, if my managers and leaders don't have an experimental design mindset, if they don't think in this way, and many people went through their professional careers not thinking this way, then we are not going to be learning as much, and we learn through experiments. Anyway, so helpful example, please, Brett. Within BlackRock.
I'm the other Brett. Pete.
Yeah.
You're the Wilson.
I'm sorry. Pete. I'm sorry. Got it. Sorry. Pete.
I worked for. I stayed in the Bay Area after Haas and worked for a little company called Barra, which was sort of a almost an offshoot of Cal. I mean, it was in some ways started by Berkeley professors, and then went over to Barclays Global Investors, which was bought by BlackRock. And the point I make there is that both Barra and BGI were very innovative in their industry, and BGI especially so. I mean, they may not mean much to people here, or maybe it does, but three things that it did is indexing, which was revolutionary in the industry at the time. Quantitative management, not the only firm that did it, but certainly was one of the key firms that pioneered it. And then more recently, iShares, and really pushing exchange-traded funds into the forefront. And it was this idea of experimentation. In our industry, it's usually things that are pretty simple, that make life easier and simpler, that can work, but trying to break down market barriers. The market sets itself around things, and very aggressive companies are trying to protect their margins and their share. So if you have a new idea, you have to push it. And the other thing I would say is that the patience was key. So I remember I went to a management thing maybe, 10 or 15 years ago at Harvard. In fact, I remember Terry O'Reilly, who was a professor here, was one of the people that ran it. And we're working with these other industries and technology, especially, where they went from idea to implementation and execution so fast, and if the product didn't succeed within a short amount of time, they killed it.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there thinking, it sometimes takes 10 years for us to get an idea actually going with, getting commercialized. Even 15 years if you include getting a track record going and the assets flow in. So it's a very different focus for our industry.
Good example. I mean, you mentioned the client piece of it. So is it good for the client and so forth? Everybody in the room has heard this before, but I think it was Henry Ford. If you asked people at the turn of the last century what people wanted to improve their transportation, they would have said faster horses, right? Not automobiles. They didn't see that part of it, right? So as you think about kind of good for the client, but also crossing a line where the client hardly knows what might be coming. In fact, Pete and I were just talking earlier today, in a world where defined benefit pensions are going to get increasingly scarce. There's just no question about that. How will we, as a world, as a society, manage what people call longevity risk? I mean, the biggest risk any of us face as individuals is that we don't know how long we're going to live, and it's hard to financial plan around that and define so these are the kinds of things where you say, wow, if that's the need and defined benefit ain't going to serve it in the future, then how do you serve it? Because the need is there. And boy, isn't that kind of a neat way to start thinking about what's that next level for the customer, for the client in that area. Marcelo, you talked about orchestration. I loved that idea, and I think it really came out a bit. I mean, you certainly in launching TubeMogul, you had to bring together resources that weren't available to you. Could you say a little bit more when you've seen people that pulled resources together, orchestrated, what are some of the examples in your mind?
Well, I think we have an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity in the time we're living, in the interconnectedness with the internet and technology, that allows you to leverage resources that were out of your reach, 15 years ago. One simple example. In our earthquake in 2010, as a network, we started opening up to get some fundraising to help. But it was one of the MBAs, I think it's 2007 or 8, Alejandro de Giorgis, that really took the lead and started connecting the people from his company, the people from the network, the alumni network, through the chapter he was connecting back to the Bay Area. And with just one little flick, he was able to put in motion and energizing all of us, a whole network that we ended up, with the support of the Alumni Network Office, reaching out to all the alums and getting donations from different parts of the world. That was, to me, was just mind-blowing, and not only because of the power of being able to mobilize that, but also that just a very recent MBA was able, and he was empowered to do something like this.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of moving more into the business side, Marcos Kulka, MBA 01, CEO of Fundación Chile, is the largest innovation organization in Chile. That's a company that orchestrates research from different parts of the world and connect it to the local needs in the country. Again, that's another work of, it's impossible with the level, Chile, I think, has the number of probably Berkeley has more PhDs than Chile completely. So how can a country that doesn't have that level of science being able to create meaningful innovations? Well, orchestration is one way. And the ways organizations like Fundación Chile does is that they connect knowledge from different parts of the world and with the local needs, and working with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, they fund and spin off those companies. And it's, again, just an exercise of connecting the dots, putting them together for the purpose of a goal.
Nice. And network creation, huh? Kind of building that connective tissue there. And Victor, so for those of you that don't follow Twitter, you should. And this guy right here is a real node within the Twitter sphere. Could you talk a little bit about how you think about the sort of social network that you are so much a part of, and how you think about the role that could play in orchestration and potentially pathbending?
Yes, I am quite often on Twitter, and Julie, all your comments about Intel are already on Twitter, so you're fine.
Okay.
No.
Don't worry.
I don't have to go to work on Monday then.
No, you can skip it. It's true that what we do is we build fairly sophisticated online communities, websites, for large foundations. Talking about pathbender leaders, our clients are, the Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Skoll Foundation. You know about Gates, I'm sure you know about Ford. Jeff Skoll was the founding president of eBay. All pathbending leaders on their own, and creating foundations, not charities, but foundations helping social entrepreneurs, like actually Paul Rice that you mentioned, and we try to connect them. So we build those online communities to make sure that they all exchange best practices. Now, you can take that for granted, and I'm going to give you an example. I was not so long ago in Nairobi, and I met this social innovator working in what we call slums. I like it better, to call it informal settlements, saying that the slum was facing this issue. There was a railroad just in the middle of it, and the railway organization wanted to build, walls because, it was so much disruption. She had to fly twice to Mumbai to find out how another social innovator, social entrepreneur, was able to solve the problem. We here in the Bay Area, right away, think there might be a better way. So we take it for obvious because we live here in the Bay Area, because we're connected to Haas, to Berkeley, and to the whole Silicon Valley. Now, just yesterday, I was in Detroit, Michigan. I was there for 3 days doing field research, talking to other social innovators, trying to solve the problem, employment, health, education in Detroit. 3 days, about 12 or 14 meetings, not a single person talked about Facebook or Twitter. Not a single one. It never came into the conversation. That's how, when you're talking about building networks, realizing how fortunate we are to be living here and to think slightly outside the box and think what it is that we can do better. What are the tools that we can use to actually build those networks and orchestrate, as you just said, a global movement so that people can actually work together. So don't worry, Julie. It's not only about what people say, the overheard. It's about what is it that you have done in one part of the world that another person on the other side of the planet should be doing as well. That's what the social media are for in our case.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I think that mindset, which we actively select for, right? We've all worked with people where you're talking to them and you just know their minds immediately go to that place. There's got to be a better way to do this. And there are people we've all worked with where it's not clear that thought has ever gone through their minds, right? And so it's a really valuable thought for people to have. It's also the sorts of people that you're working with, you know the feeling, right? They're just looking for the white space around their jobs and around their business all the time. It's just kind of in their nature. And there are other people where it's like, this is my role, and I'm going to do it, and they might do it very, very well. But that instinct of looking for and occupying white space doesn't come so easily. We certainly want that habit of mind of there's got to be a better way to do this. Brett, when launching, could you also talk a little bit more about pulling together resources, not just TubeMogul, but as you think about kind of orchestration in your path as a leader, are you seeing this as really absolutely central to what you do, to driving value?
Seems like pulling together resources has gotten easier in a way because there's so much information available. Capital is more easily available. There's software that's open source where you can launch a company and go from 0 to warp speed in just no time at all. There's these social media tools that Victor talked about where you can really easily amplify your message. You can change the conversation. And we've all got access to it. So, we think a lot about speed and iteration. And one of the things we talk about at TubeMogul is, well, how do you really enable that? So it's not just a cliche. And we talk a lot about making mistakes. And we actually incentivize people for making mistakes. And we tell them that mistakes are okay. Going slow isn't. And we're trying to build a culture and incentive systems where we can actually, we do go fast daily because you have to in a world where resources are more available than they've ever been.
And do you try and frame the sort of steps or decisions that people are taking so that those mistakes are small rather than large? How do you keep them small?
There's a lot of ways. Our board helps us keep them small. We we were really intense culture. We have board meetings every 6 weeks. So we've got some kind of decision-making frameworks that have to happen. I think startups today generally think small. It's about hitting the goals in front of you today. And there's a notion that if you do that and you stay focused on what's in front of you and iterate, that's how you get big.
Great, thank you. Here, let me try this on the panel, because for those of you that were here this morning, you heard us or me talk a little bit more about path bending. But let's push back on the concept. When you hear that word path bending, or you read it here, if it was the first time you read it, or what misgivings did you have? What counsel would you give me as Dean of the Business School and say, Rich, whoa, don't lean into that too much, or here are some unintended understandings of that phrase that you might want to manage? What thoughts? Anything about that you think is risky? Please.
The thought that came to my mind is when you correlate path bending leadership and questioning the status quo. I thought that's something that's not working for me. And I think that's what it is. Just listening to this conversation, I realized this is not only about questioning the status quo, this is about implementing the change. And that's very important because especially we here at Berkeley and especially at Haas, we are not necessarily just thinkers, we are doers, we're implementers. And we talked about that a few minutes ago. It's about implementing, trying, hopefully making mistakes, but not too big because the board, will have a fit. But that, I think, is what was missing in my mind. So the path-bending leadership is important, especially when not only you question the status quo, but you implement the change right away.
That's good. That's really important. That's really important. I think one of the things that's really important, thank you, one of the other skills that is in our curriculum in a much deeper way than it ever has been. It's always been in the curriculum to some degree, but that was influence without authority. And I think people are without the need for formal authority, right? In more and more organizations, big or small, people will tell you if you're getting things done by playing the authority card, you're probably not getting them done the best way, right? I heard somebody say not long ago that when you're thinking about a change or a transformation project or even just a decision, that the effectiveness, let me call it E, the effectiveness of that change or decision equals Q times A. Effectiveness equals Q times A. What is Q? Q is the quality of the decision or the quality of the direction that you want to go, how well thought it is, how precise it is. But A is the acceptance of the decision, right? And you want to move people, boy, if you haven't moved the hearts and minds first, right, the authority is very unlikely to get you there. So there are other elements of our curriculum, but I think that's absolutely fundamental. Bending a path is an action. It's not a thought. Yep. It's an action. And we need to make sure we stay anchored to that. Other thoughts along these lines? Please, Pete.
One of the, as I looked at it, putting the term leadership with it, I struggled with that a little bit because, I think implicit in that is just either succeeding yourself in in business or making the organization succeed. And obviously, that's critical ultimately. But I think that it could be a small or large organization, but maybe more noticeable in larger organizations. I'm not sure, but there's different people take different paths. I mentioned being individual contributor versus there's people I've worked with over the years where maybe they won't admit it, but they're certainly focused on looking at an org chart and they're going to try to get themselves as high up on the org chart as they can, regardless of what the next job up is, and they'll sort of transform themselves as much as they can to get to that level. And you need people like that. You need people that are willing to take on that management role and lead people. And I've been in situations where I was managing a lot of people for periods of time, and I got tired of it, and then I moved to another role and went down to a small staff, and then it built up again. And for me, that worked better. I've never been focused saying I need to be at the top of the organization. So I would say, path-bending leadership, but part of it is, is think about what's the fit for you. Yeah. What do you want to do, and then pursue that. Not get too worried. One of the reasons I left New York and came to the West Coast is in New York there was a real focus, especially at the time. I don't know if it's as much now. Is so much focus on so and so is making more money than me. So and so has some job they shouldn't have. In the Bay Area, I don't think people are as hung up on that, which is nice. You can kind of focus on what you want to do and who you are. Great. I think that personal style is pursuing your own personal style is important.
Great. That's important. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I actually more had a question for you, and it's kind of related to the comments that Peter was just making. When you say path bending, just because of my own experience, I thought of almost like a winding river. It's like the water knows where it needs to go ultimately, and it's just going to keep going and being, persistent and figuring out a path, and it's going to get there. So for me, it's kind of like that nonlinear path. But then I thought about it, maybe you mean path bending, like somebody who by brute force is just going to come up there and be like, I'm going to bend this path. I'm going to move it from here to there. It probably depends on the style of the person, but I kind of wonder which definitions you have in mind.
Yeah, sure. Well, so one of the things that we motivated it with was this idea that in many different areas in society, worldwide, if you look at the data, healthcare expenditure as a percentage of GDP, just as an example, it looks pretty linear over the last 20 or 30 years. And we know that it can't remain linear over 30, 40, 50 years, our kids' lifetimes, right? So these are kind of big macro paths that you would say are at the same time enormous commercial opportunities if we can bend them, but also unsustainabilities if we cannot. I mean, we must bend them, or healthcare will become the economy, right? That we know that can't play out. That can't keep going up at that pace. And so that's part of it. But that takes kind of the grand challenges of our time lens, right? And it looks at it that way. But one of the dangers of that is we cannot become a niche school, right? We certainly need to accommodate all kinds that come through here. But that was one. Healthcare expenditure, energy use, the economics of aging, if you thought about clean water around the world, or many other things like that. Obesity, there's so many areas that people would say those paths need to get bent. But I think it needs to be even wider than that, right? Because as people think, here's one way that I think about it too, is that, you know, bending a path need not be sort of a Herculean effort at a point in time. If you bend it a degree, if you sustain over a lifetime, over the arc of your career, right? You bend things by degrees. And if you continue to apply the pressure, so that's one of the things. There is a kind of mindset, orientation, not necessarily something that happens quickly, but that you are part of that force, perhaps collectively, that's moving something that needs to be moved to make it work. But I think that was an important part of the initial concept. Please, go ahead. Brett.
I think one of the risks of path bending is not communicating why the path needs to be bent. And I find in our small organization, we spend a lot of time talking, and we've got 2 different businesses, and we're actively cannibalizing one, and that scares the heck out of the salespeople and the people associated with that business, and it requires us to educate them as to the alternative, educate them what happens if we don't do this, because if people aren't bought in, paths are difficult to bend, and nothing happens. So it's one of the risks.
Thank you. So I think you've hit on something that's important. All of you in your roles have been involved in what some people call change management or transformation programs, things like that, right? So how about sort of the biggest insight in your own roles as change leaders, change managers? Anything that comes to mind when you think, boy, you know, I'm never going to manage change again after that message, positive or negative. Anything that comes to mind on the change leadership front?
I think change is a lot about trust, and employees, team members, constituents need to know that regardless of the title, of the role, that management respects them, is there for them, loves them. That while change is inevitable, you have people looking out for you in the organization so that it's not so scary. So if you have a culture where people are okay with change because they know there's still a place for them somewhere, I think it helps a lot. So.
Thanks for that. Anybody else want to throw one in?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just comment. I would agree with that, and I think if you can recognize the comparative advantages of all the stakeholders, you know, hey, we're going to change our strategy here, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we're going to take over everything and start, you know, doing it ourselves. It's like, you guys are still the experts in convening the software ecosystem. You guys are still the experts in, you know, designing the reference designs, and we're just going to take all of that and leverage it to, you know, make the most of this new direction.
Nice. Nice. And you had mentioned, I think, one of your examples earlier, Julie, about, you know, getting the experiment far enough along, right? Yeah. So that people, that, you know, the proof point is there. You can say, look, we've tested it. It's working, right? This is not theory anymore. Right. That can obviously be very valuable. Mm-hmm. Anything, Pete or Marcelo?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Change is hard. There's ample evidence and literature about how people don't want to change, basically. But I think the hardest thing in the process of change that I've been involved is actually leading with my own inflexibility for change. So if you are leading change, you have to accept that you have to be open to also change the way you are planning that change. And most of the efforts that have failed in change have been basically, I have sabotaged myself. Even the leader that's supposed to be leading change doesn't want to change, basically.
That's very good. One of the students so we just had an admitted student event here a couple of weeks ago, and the president of this was the MBA program in this case. The president of the class was talking a little bit about our culture, but he used a phrase that for me clicked. He talked about questioning his own status quo. Thought, what an interesting way to take a phrase that's very important to us and sort of say, no, wait a minute. Anyways, I thought of that line when you made that point. Pete, yeah.
I think that you know, there's different aspects of that. I mean, you know, maybe a little all over the map, but just, you know, thinking out loud a bit. One thing is on the concept of change more in terms of related to job security. One thing that we've noticed and actually are struggling with a bit in hiring younger people, which in some of the people in the room, maybe, you know, people that are, I don't know, 35 and under, just to pick some kind of, you know, age group, are interviewing with the organization, and the industry's changed, but they're coming in and asking a lot of questions about stability, and they're wanting to choose stability, or they're weighing the value of stability much higher than we would have seen 10, 20 years ago, where they'll say, hey, we'll take some instability with the chance of big opportunity to do well. And even to the point of looking at the company I'm in, which is I would consider very stable in the industry, and saying, we're worried because you've had some changes where you've laid a few people off, and you know, and it's funny because we're in an industry where all the capital is human capital, so we have to move the human capital to where the business is working and away from where it's not. So, but it's an attitude change that we're dealing with. And related to that, I would say one of the things I've tried to do, and I admire others that have it more than I, is having a real core competency, something they learned really well, they also like and they're interested in it, and then they use that constantly through the career, even if their job changes from doing that particular thing. Being an expert, you know, or very good at one area, then leveraging that through, not only you gain respect of others, but you can use that knowledge and that skill in some way.
Yes.
And that's a good thing to have. I think some people get a little off balance if they don't have it, or they get away from it too far.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, I mean, some of that could be sort of this millennial, their demographics, I think, that are consistent with this sort of demand for job security, right? Have to be careful overgeneralizing, right? But the sort of helicopter parent phenomenon and other things where people, it's like, I need to see the path, right? You know, make it more secure. And I think people 10, 20 years ago coming through our school, we felt a little bit less of that. I mean, about 6 or 7 years ago, the median student in our graduate program was not a millennial. Now they are. It's like we've slept right through the middle of the distribution. We swept right through the middle of the distribution, and now we're kind of through the fat part of that bell curve. Usually people time the sort of 1980 is sort of the kick-in of the millennials. So our median MBA is about 27, so they're very, very, very clearly a millennial. And our faculty, some of our faculty that are among our best teachers, are having trouble in the classroom, in part because some of these dynamics. It's not just, you know, the job security. That's the way it manifests in Europe. But you know, it's like, show me exactly what I need to do, right? Give me the roadmap. Give me the checklist, right, of this class. And sort of like, whoa. We need you to think through this thing. So, anyways, I'm overstating it, but we're sensing it here as well, right? And that's a demographic shift. If you said, you know, is that a big generalization here? But if that drift that we're seeing, you know, is that the stuff of path bending? That doesn't feel like the stuff of path bending, right? And so that's one of the things we've been thinking about. Here, let me ask this question, because you all have so much experience and insight on this. How about this? You mentioned hiring. So here we are. We get to select our students. We get to select them. What would you select for? What would you, if we wanted to produce, attract, develop, but attract, admit more path bending leaders? You know, is there an interview question? A diagnostic, an instrument? What would you do, Victor?
I think I would disagree with you, Peter, if I may. I think I would hire people who are not necessarily going deep into one area, but most likely people who have both right brain and left brain talent. I guess my motto is, you know, right brain, left brain, white shoes. I mean, you've got a whole brain, so use all of it. And that's the kind of people that actually we hire in our business. There are people who are very good at coding, programming, and man, when they get in front of a piano or a guitar, they know how to make the room rock. And then, by the way, they're bilingual, if not trilingual, and they can write because they used to work for in magazine publishing before that. When I see those kind of people, I say, no matter what, let's not even talk about salary, you got a job. Because that's the kind of people who are really going to to bend the path, because they can pick some information, some data, some knowledge from one part of the brain or one part of their knowledge and apply it into another part. That really what makes it very successful. Now, there are people slightly, I would say, difficult to manage. That can happen because they can be extremely creative. They can go, in wide ideas, talking about, mistakes. They shouldn't be too expensive. But they are the kind of people who will come up with the creative ideas, and also they will know how to implement those ideas that will actually make a company successful. Now, there could be a difference between a smaller business and a large corporation, and I hear that. But in my mind, again, right brain, left brain, both is much better.
Thank you, Victor. Other thoughts?
I think for me, it's, what do you want to do? What's your biggest goal in life? And give me, at least 5 ways you could get there. Because, the most obvious way, is probably not going to work. So I just think to really, as you were talking about, make a market difference in terms of, changing a big trend, or, you're going to have to be persistent, resilient, unreasonable at times. And so, let's just hear the list of different ways that you're going to approach it.
Nice. Thanks. Others?
I would, a couple of things. One, I would say we look for, and we have a company where it's individuals are hyper-developed on one side of the brain, and we've got people that you would probably, I'm no expert, but you'd probably classify as, Asperger's, autistic to some degree. They're so hyper-developed, but they do a great job. I mean, they are literally brilliant at something they do. But
there aren't any of those at the university, by the way. I just want to be clear.
I mean, but the social skills on some of the people that work in the industry I'm in are, and I'm sure the industries you guys are in are very limited in some ways, but they're great at certain things they do. So there's that aspect. But what I was going to say is diversity is critical. I had to learn this and be educated on it. And actually, it was a professor from Harvard we had in. She was talking about the value of hiring people that are different from you, because the natural thing is to hire someone that thinks like you, has a similar background. And the problem is then the thinking is all the same. But it's hard to go into that mode where you're challenged and get into it. Actually, the thing I've been looking at lately, because everybody goes through, we have all this, frameworks for interviewing. I find it incredibly tedious and boring. I mean, within 3 minutes, whether you're kind of into the candidate or not. And I'm texting my admin to call me or something and say, get me out of this as fast as possible. Versus someone you like and you're trying to sell them. But the kind of the soft stuff is I like to ask about, what's their background, where are they from, if they have a significant other or a spouse, tell me about that person. I think getting some depth, I like people to me, it's people that have some depth. So when they're in kind of the line of fire or they're in the white space, they're secure enough, there's something there, they feel confident to do it and go after it and solve it. As opposed to some people that just are by the numbers and I need very task-oriented, I need the roadmap, which drives me nuts because I'm not a manager that's going to give you tasks. I'm just like, this is what we're trying to get to. Come to me if there's a problem. I mean, that's like the level of management that we're going to get. So I think that's important for people that can have those abilities, but have that depth of personality or character.
That's nice, that multiple perspectives, diversity. Brett, you had
one of the qualities that we value, and I think it's a real Berkeley-Haas quality, is just people that are humble. And last night we had a cocktail hour with class of 2007, and conversations weren't really about jobs and money and promotions. It was about people and happiness. And we look for people that use the pronoun we in interviews. We look for people that kind of understand how lucky they are to be applying to Haas in the first place or at TubeMogul and understand kind of the sacrifices people have made and kind of just the mix of things that needs to happen. When you get people like that, you just have less BS in your organization and less ego, and you're just focused on getting things done.
That's nice. That's nice. Marcelo?
I just want to bring back another point. I guess nobody would disagree that you would want people that are balance, creative, right side, left side, multiple interests. I think nobody can disagree with that. But just want to not to lose perspective that in terms of the admissions process for the for the school, you want diversity in the pool, because if you get a lot of everybody is as right side, left side brain, you basically end up with a similar pool of very interesting people. But I think what really makes Haas an amazing place is that you have these extremes on the other hand, like people that are really right brain, really left brain. The people that have deep interest in arts, deep interest in technology, and is that mix that makes this place special, and ends up getting into you and learning to survive in these 2 years in the MBA, working with the people that are so different from you. Yeah. I think that's a key differentiator that we can't lose.
Thank you for that. That's important. It's you know, we just hired a fellow. He's absolutely terrific. His name is Eric Abrams, and he said something the other day about this kind of super collider of perspectives that we want to be, right? And what he said is, he said, diversity is not about how you look. It's about how you think. And I thought, well, that's a really potent phrase. He said, you could walk into the United Nations, he used this example, and meet people, and you could look at them and think, wow, these people are very different, all these different countries and cultures. But then when you meet them, you realize they all kind of came from the same strata of their society. They all kind of, they got a lot of commonality in this room. This is nowhere near as diverse a group as you might imagine, right? And that's a potent element. One of the things, and we have to move to the next session, but I loved these comments, and so many things organically came out that are so powerful. Here's something I'll toss out to the group. We've only piloted it yet so far, but we got some interesting results. Look, if society needs people to lead, the people that we have the honor of educating here, then I think having an interview be part of the admissions process, that's been a necessary condition to get into one of our master's programs for a long, long time. But we still don't interview the undergraduates for our program. And so I'm very keen on, among many other things, including an interview as part of how we make decisions on undergraduate admissions. You can imagine it's sensitive. You can imagine it would have lots of unintended consequences. We're going to do our very best to manage that, but I think that's a little bit of what we're trying to do, is if we're really going to talk about leaders, if we're going to take that mission statement seriously, then let's take it seriously, by God, and let's see what we can do with it. So that's one of the things that we're working on there. Look, there are many elements of who we are that are so distinctive, and when we mix them together with the tremendous place asset that we have, being part of this university super brand called Berkeley and being part of the San Francisco Bay Area, the sorts of people that come here. You know, when we wrote Question the Status Quo down, it's kind of like, man, you were just codifying stuff that's been here forever, right? If that's not Berkeley, I don't know what is, right? So we feel as though we've got a very rich mix. I have not, in my reading of sort of where innovation and change and evolution and path bending comes from, I have never read that literature and thought, oh, that's not Berkeley, or that piece isn't Berkeley. Every time I hear a panel like this, it feels to me like we have such a terrific constellation of ingredients for going at this in a unique way, and we're gonna keep doing that. Let's all thank our panelists here. But thank you very much.